Yeah, so I started listening to metal and punk and hardcore when I was in high school. Right. So, before I must have discovered it when I watched this show on MTV called Headbangers Ball. They'd play. Okay, I think this talk's going to go well. And so it must have hit me at the right time, and I just realized I liked it because before that, I just really wasn't into it at all. I would hear it here and there and just think, what is this? These long-haired idiots screaming and banging on things. This wasn't my thing. But at some point, when I was young, I realized that I needed some escapism. I would watch Star Wars and Star Trek all the time, and get the books. And I was working on a comic book collection. But then I started getting into music instead. I stopped reading comic books and started buying records because I needed something else. And then I got into metal, I think, because I needed something more. My Kiss records weren't like doing it for me anymore. I needed another release. So as some of you apparently already know, metal. It's played by people with long hair and black T-shirts like this maybe, and there's band names that you might have heard even if you're not into it, like Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and Metallica, that kind of thing. And I think metal got on the big stage in America when Tipper Gore used to complain about it a lot in the 80s. She would say it was corrupting America's youth. Well, I wanted to get corrupted. I wanted to find the next band that was heavier and faster and louder than the last one. It makes me think of like when you get into horror movies, you might like Dracula or Rosemary's Baby, but then you want something more. You want The Exorcist, and maybe after that you want Dawn of the Dead, and then after that you want I Spit on Your Grave. It was like that with me with metal. And so I think the first time I went to a metal show, it was in 1988 in Reston, Virginia, in a garage. There was a bunch of hardcore bands playing, and then this death metal band played called Deceased. That's a pretty good name for a death metal band, right? And I was just amazed. I'd never seen anything like it before. There was so much energy in the room, and everybody was running around, and they were headbanging, and it was so loud, and there was so much energy, and it was so raw. And so I started discovering more bands like that because I started pursuing this stuff. Bands like, they had names like Discordance Axis and Napalm Death and Pestilence and Cannibal Corpse and Rotten Sound. And oh, by the way, that's what they sound like, Rotten Sound. And somewhere in there I started, I met somebody at Nova who had a zine, a paper zine. And he would write about bands and interview them and review them and type it all up and put it in this print zine. So I started writing for him, and I discovered that there are other ones in different places. It turns out there's this underground network of metal where everybody is got all they would publish their own paper zines, and people would have bands and make demo tapes, and they would send them to these zines and get reviews. And I started trading in all that stuff. I would get zines in the mail, and people would send me demos when I started my own zine and started doing the same thing. And I would tape trade. And so I'd hear about all these new bands all the time, and I would just listen to music and write letters. And I really enjoyed it. Getting getting new pen pals, writing letters, putting stamps on envelopes. It was a really great time. And it really was. This is not the same anymore, And so I think the last time I got shocked by a band was there was this band called Carcass. And I heard it for the first time. I just couldn't believe it. It was so distorted, and the instruments were so down-tuned, and the vocals sounded just completely insane. And the album cover had these really gruesome images on it. And I was listening to it and thinking, this is disgusting. I love it. So the thing though is there was this band that became one of my favorites, and they're called Voivod. So just like on the back of the jacket here. They were really different because their lyrics are really intelligent. They weren't just singing about gore. You could tell that they read books. They weren't just a bunch of idiots playing music. They were really innovative the way they put their songs together. They had concepts behind their records. Their chords, their guitar chords were really neat. And they had this one record called Dimension Hatros. And I can't remember how I heard it. I might have seen a video on Headbangers Ball, or one of the guys in that band, deceased, told me to pick up the record. But I got it on tape, and I would just listen to it all the time. I wore the tape out. It's one of my top 5 desert island records. So what happened next was I liked them so much that I even got a tattoo. Here, I got this Voivod tattoo, this tattoo here. You can see it. And so what I did was I picked out this piece of artwork because it's sort of tucked away inside a few of the Voivod records. So if you're just a casual listener, you might not know what it is, but like the down in the wool Voivod fan will recognize it, right? So then one time I was on this fan website, with a message board, and everybody's talking about the band. And this one guy had an avatar, and the avatar was a picture of his Voivod tattoo. So, and guess which tattoo he had? So I guess I wasn't that clever after all. But I actually got them to meet the band because of my zine. I got an interview with them. I went to the show and I met the drummer. His stage name is Away, and he's one of the masterminds of the band, and he's known in the metal community because of his artwork and his calligraphy. So it was really amazing to meet this guy. I've been listening to his music for so long and watching the videos and everything, and I got to talk to him, and then I went home and typed up the interview and put it in my zine. But I'll come back to that later. I discovered, listening to all these bands from all over the place, there's this funny intersection between metal and science in the lyrical concept. There's plenty of bands that had mad scientist lyrics, and the machines are going to take over the world and enslave all of us. But there was some other stuff too, like nuclear proliferation, things like that, where there was a little more depth to it. But the band that I thought was the best at talking about science is Voivod. And going back to that record I was talking about, Dimension Hatros, I've got the LP of it here. This is the album Dimension Hatros, and this is where I think they reach the apex of talking about science in their lyrics. It was complicated enough that they had to put a summary of what the album's about on the back. Over here. There's that calligraphy I was talking about. The drummer did all this. So it says, inside a giant particle accelerator, a beam of protons traveling at near the speed of light meets a beam of antiprotons moving equally fast in the opposite direction. The protons and mirror image antiprotons annihilate each other, creating the fiery chaos of a parallel microgalaxy. Experiment 1 complete, the Voivod goes into that new dimension, meeting different psychic entities and civilizations, extracting knowledge and energy in the 8 programs of the program called Dimension Hatros. And there's 8 programs because there's 8 songs on the record. So I just found that really interesting. The way they put this together and how they were doing something different with their lyrics. And maybe I liked it because, I used to really be into Star Wars and Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and all that stuff. And I still am. I still consume science fiction, but lately I've gotten really interested in actual science. I'll follow the Rosetta mission and the New Horizons mission. I joined the American Geophysical Union, AGU. Yeah. Just this week, I renewed my membership to the DC Science Writers Association. Taxwa! Yeah. And I'll even go so far as to, go to Alexandria, Virginia, to the river late at night, just so I could see a rocket launch from Wallops Island. And from there, all you're going to see is just this little speck of light come up over the horizon and then disappear in the clouds. But that was enough. So last year, Away came around with a band that he was playing in, and he played in D.C. So I went to the show, and I had printed out that interview that I had done with him in my zine years before, hoping I could meet him. So I ran into him, I gave it to him, and I embarrassed him by showing him my Voivod tattoo. And we started chit-chatting and hanging out. And eventually he says, "Do you have a pen?" So I went in my bag and pulled a pen out and gave it to him. And he said, "Do you have something to write on?" So I went into my bag and pulled out my notebook and gave it to him. So he flips to a blank page and he holds it up with the pen and he says, "Okay, what do you want?" And I'm going, what's going on here? And he says, "Do you want a flying saucer?" I said, "Yeah, I want a flying saucer." So while I'm standing there, he draws a flying saucer, and then he writes "To Richard" with 3 exclamation points, and then he signs it and he gives it to me. I just couldn't believe this was happening. I would never have known, actually, that going to that show, just hoping to meet this guy again, that I would end up walking away with an original piece of artwork from Away that's, got my name on it. It was amazing. I liked it so much. When I took it home the next day, I tore it out, put it in a frame, and hung it on the wall. And, that the flying saucer and the whole experience, it just sort of symbolizes and reminds me where I've been going with this music for over 25 years, and this interest in science that I have that's going to go into the future, an interest in science and not just science fiction. Thank you.